Hi, everyone. We are so excited to welcome you to this National Young Writers Festival panel, #LoveAusYA, more than just a hashtag. We're coming to you on unceded lands all over Australia and pay our respects to elders, past, present and emerging. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So my name is Bianca. I'm a YA writer and I work at the Literature Centre in Fremantle, WA. I'm the Communications Director at LoveAusYA and the creator of YA for WA. I'm broadcasting from Wajak Noongar land and pay my respects to them as the traditional custodians.
Thank you, Bianca. I am Alison Evans and I am coming to you from the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and pay my respects to the elders past and present and acknowledge that this land was stolen, sovereignty was never ceded. I am a YA author of 3 novels, Ida, Highway Bodies, and Euphoria Kids. They are all sci-fi or fantasy and very queer. And I also work as a children's bookseller.
Thanks, Alison. And my name is Jess Sanders, and I'm coming to you from Lutruwita, Tasmania. I'm a social worker in practice, and I also write children's books that surround topics such as gender, emotional intelligence, body image, and things like that. Some of my books include Love Your Body, Be Your Own Man, and most recently, You Are Enough.
Amazing.
Beautiful. So we might start off with what is LoveAusYA? What does it mean? So it is Love Australian YA, a very clever little shortening of Australia there. No, it came about in 2015 when the Australian Library and Information, ALIA, the Australian Library and Information Association published the top, like the most borrowed books in YA, and the top 10 were all American. And we were sort of like, oh no, because Australian teens should be able to read about Australian teens in their fiction as well. And so LoveAusYA started as a quick, easy way to access Australian YA just by clicking on a little hashtag. And so it's just sort of a way for the community to find each other easily and come together and celebrate our books.
And here we are. It's now a registered charity as well under the Australian Young Adult Literature Alliance. So it's very exciting. It's legit, but it has very, very humble roots. So we are going to touch on LoveAusYA quite a bit in this panel, but we also did want to talk about social media in general because it is just so big. And Jess, I wanted to start with you because I'm particularly interested in your Kickstarter. You got one of your books published using a Kickstarter. Can you tell us a bit about that and also how you use social media to help you do that?
Yeah, for sure. I think, without social media, I probably wouldn't be writing books now, which is kind of interesting. So back in 2018, I was sitting at a table, my dining room table with my housemate, discussing body image in young women in particular and how pervasive negative body image was. And she sort of made this comment you should make a book to normalize what is normal and to include all the things that we're talking about and that we've had to learn through our adult lives or unlearn, but that, we wish we had known. I just felt so motivated to bring that into the world. And at the time, there wasn't a whole heap of non-fiction children's books that were in the mainstream. So I actually have parents who work in the educational publishing space, and so they were really common there, but I wasn't seeing it in the mainstream. And so I thought I wouldn't get a publisher if I approached them directly, so I decided to self-publish. And I had seen Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls do an amazing job on their Kickstarter, and I thought, what a great idea. So I was still at uni, so I used the uni facilities to create a video and a student to create the animation. I did all the graphic kind of stuff myself and all the copy, made this video on Kickstarter. And I didn't actually spend a cent on marketing. It was all done through social media and quite grassroots spaces. So reaching out to influencers saying, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. Like, if you resonate, would you be able to share it with your community? Or finding like niche Facebook groups that, you know, were connected to the theme of body image or female empowerment, and just absolutely spamming everyone basically, asking them to share it. And it worked because we were able to raise just under $30,000 to fund the publication of the books, from the book at the time. And yeah, we had nearly 1,000 people back it, which was just such a vote of confidence for me personally, because I had, you know, I'd paid the designer myself, I'd paid the illustrator myself, and I had managed the whole production of the book. So it was basically ready to go when the Kickstarter went. But more importantly, it showed and validated, I guess, that there wasn't so much risk there with publishing something in the nonfiction space in the mainstream to publishers, and they saw that people wanted it. And I think that's the power of social media and crowdfunding, is like to create some grassroots projects or communities or whatever it is, and to be able to show that people want them, to show that demand, because as we know, like publishing is, you know, there's low profit margins, and so not much room for error. We want to stay in spaces that are kind of safe to publish, or with people who are safe. So like getting your stuff published to someone unknown is always a big challenge, because you already don't bring that brand rep and that exposure. So yeah, I don't know, it was a really amazing process. But through that, I actually had a couple publishers reach out, and I was able to negotiate quite a good deal, a 2-book deal, and then continue to publish and bring out books. So that was my kind of kickstarting journey, but it was very connected to social media, and Instagram, Facebook groups, TikTok wasn't a thing at the time, but I can't believe that's a thing. I don't think it is. Does that make sense? God.
Yeah, so cool. So did you, I don't really want to talk about marketing too much, but how did you get the word out there with social media? Did you approach a lot of people about it, or just post about it?
I'd approach people, for example, my book was around healthy body image and healthy relationships to food, and I was aware of the Health at Every Size movement as a result of, you know, being educated by other advocates on body positive activists as well on Instagram. And so I would go into that Facebook group and be like, hey guys, this is what I'm trying to do. Like, this is a book, you can see some pages. If you think that you'd be able to use something like this with your clients, for example, I'd be so appreciative if you could pre-order a copy. And it was really heartening, I guess, for people that you didn't know you and didn't know even what the whole book looked like, to put money behind you and trust that you would deliver that product. But niche Facebook groups. I think a few influencers, and I tried to get to media, to be honest, but I absolutely had no success. So I don't think many influencers would have shared it. I actually think sort of niche Facebook groups. Oh, actually, that's not true. Jamila shared it. That was my one thing that got me over the end of the line. What am I talking about? I managed to get a HuffPost article just through relationships in America. And then because this was like Kickstarter all over the world, I was going to deliver wherever using print on demand. We can go more into that if people are not sure what that is. But and I think that helped get it over the line. But it was just absolutely being shameless about reaching out to people and saying, hey, this is a thing I'm making. And obviously you get rejected a bunch of times, but you also get people who completely understand what you're trying to do and support you. And I would just tell everyone, even when I was bartending at the time while trying to support myself through my master's placement in social work. So I would just talk to anyone and everyone about it. And I think that's an important part of it too. And often writers, I feel shy to share their work or talk about it. But I think it was, the reason it was able to get out there and be successful. So social media, but also that grassroots word of mouth as well.
That is incredible. Thanks for sharing that.
No worries. So I've got a question now for Alison. How do you use social media for writing, and how has it helped your career?
I think it's where I meet all my friends.
So we all hang out.
Everyone's on Twitter. But I think it was particularly through Twitter that I found the Lovers YA hashtag and then the community. I think like Adele Walsh and Wilka Stakis were the first people that I followed, which was just so fun. And then like Lily Wilkinson, and they were like my trifecta of like cool people in YA that I really loved. And so then I think just like through opportunities like short story call outs, stuff like that, is sort of how I kind of just kept the ball rolling. Because when I first started writing, I was doing a creative what am I doing? A creative writing degree. And so I didn't really decide on writing YA until like my 4th year, because I read a really terrible queer YA book. And then I was like, I could do better than that.
Amazing. I love that.
I love that.
And so that's when I really started to get into YA, especially queer YA. And I found Melinda Lowe, who is American, but she used to publish lists of all the queer YA books that came out every year, because there were about 20, like less than 20, when she started doing it. And so it was quite easy to find all the data. And that's really through Twitter is just how I found every YA person imaginable. And it's how I like keep up with events and new books in particular. Also the Lovers YA newsletter, which is very handy. But Twitter is a nice like constant reminder of what's being out, because I have a terrible memory.
That's so fair. And it is so easy to just join in. You know, you can just tag onto someone else's thread and they'll welcome you.
Yeah, like, hello. Who's talking to me?
The writing community is just so welcoming and warm in Australia.
Yeah. Kind of on that note, can you, Bianca, tell us about how you got involved with Lovers YA? Because I know you're communications director, is that right?
Yeah. Actually, just what you were saying, I was like, oh my God, me too. It was actually an opportunity, like the opportunities. But I only discovered not just Lovers YA, but that people in Australia, like just in general, read and wrote. Like I thought I was the only one. So in 2018, I went to Melbourne because that's where I thought everybody was. And that was through social media, finding out that people actually read books in Australia. And like fantasy, and that was 2018 was still like when I realized what YA was. I grew up in teeny tiny rural WA. This is why I hope that explains things. But I think that's just when I found the community and I was like, I need to throw myself into this, and was looking at writing competitions and found the call out for Underdog, the Lovers YA anthology edited by the incredible Tobias Madden. And I submitted. I always sort of want to bring it up to Tobias, but I'm terrified that he still has like copies of all the submissions. But I submitted this short story that was just like not what they were looking for at all. But I just didn't understand that you could write in Australia at the time. And then sort of from there, and being in Melbourne and going to book launches, Lily Wilkinson's book launch was the first book launch I ever went to. It just snowballed from there. And then, your world just opens up. Like, I find that the writing communities in Australia, they are there. You do have to look for them, but as soon as you know where they are, it's just this big explosion of just absolute magic. It's amazing. So, yeah, I found it that way very slowly. And then I wanted to get more involved, more in everybody's business, and just approached Lovers YA in 2021 and just said, hey, what you got for me? And they very, very kindly were opening up a social media team, and a handful of us joined. And it's sort of thanks to the wonderful Alex Patrikios, who was communications director before me, who just created the way that the Lovell's Way social media is run now, and very kindly took me on. Now I am here.
And can you tell us a bit about like what the committee does? Because for those of us who don't know.
Yeah, so we kind of have two teams. So we have the committee, who has our wonderful chair and secretary and vice chair, and they do the Lord's work, reaching out to stakeholders and kind of really big picture things. And then we have our content team who manage the social medias and the e-news on a weekly sort of basis. So my role as communications director, I coordinate the social media roster on a weekly basis and oversee the amazing social media champions. So speaking of being in everyone's business, this includes like just being really aware of all the relevant industry news, awards, like releases, plugging them into our calendar, liaising with publicists and authors for interviews about their latest releases, and just like creating social media content and just kind of being that bridge between the social media team and the committee, which is just, it's so much fun. And in case you're not aware of what Lovell's Way kind of shares, we have a lot of content that we do fairly regularly, like author interviews, both video and written transcripts. We have this really cool initiative called, I'm like not even plugging, I'm just genuinely like excited about the stuff that we do. I'm so sorry, but we have this book detective where like if you're really feeling the vibes or like themes of a book that you really want to read, you can just submit what you're looking for and we can suggest an Aussie YA that fits that. We have a regular
on the website.
It is on the website, absolutely. The book detective, it's called. It's just like the thing that I always dreamed of having. So I love it. We also have like a regular agony aunt column where you, again, can submit your own questions about like writing or the industry. It's called Ask Alice. And we also have classroom resource posters where we suggest a handful of titles that fit like a particular theme, such as disability representation or books by First Nations authors. And then we have the monthly e-news, as Alison said, that wraps it all up to this really convenient little package. And then, yeah, otherwise we'll just share like YA competitions and opportunities as they open, any events or festivals where you can see your favourite authors. Yeah, just a lot of stuff, as you can see, and just generally like interacting with the community. And I love it because it just sort of changed my life. You know, someone who grew up in rural WA, to just know that this community was here that whole time. Super, super important. Yeah. Oh, I already asked that question of you. How did you first discover it?
Well, we could go to the next one, which segues quite well. Because you organize everything, Bianca. But Jess, you also have a podcast. You have a lot of planning. There's a big schedule. How do you use the kind of that regularity and that schedule to sort of keep yourself going? Because I imagine it's quite hard to make a podcast. How do you bring all the little strings together to deliver it?
It is a lot of work. I think yeah, I was one of those people where I was like, let's make a podcast, and then just like sort of like ignorant a little bit about what's involved. But I have a good friend who actually became a good friend during the production of the Unlearning Project, my podcast. And we just really collaborated and gelled. And so she would do the technical side of things. So like editing as well as producing in terms of like creating a plan and flow for our interviews. And then I would often like research our guests and like read about their work and come up with questions, and she'd put that into an order that makes sense because they just like pop into my brain. I wasn't very good at creating the flow for the listener. So, you know, different skills coming together. And that worked really well. And then in terms of scheduling, that was probably our biggest challenge and something I'm not sure that we nailed in season 1 and it's sort of a question mark if we'll be doing season 2 because she's moved to London, which is amazing for her, not amazing for me. Having time of her life. So yeah, but we would be planning months in advance, and probably even that wasn't enough. Maybe a little bit different to social media, but the creation of social media assets was actually one of the most time-consuming things. So like taking those sound bites, adding the captions, queuing the post, creating the captions, tagging, all that kind of stuff. I would often use I used to use Planoly, but there's also, I think, another one called Buzzsprout that I would potentially use. I've forgotten the name, but like a planning app. And so you would try, if you were organized, to create all these group of assets, a certain amount of reels, a certain amount of tiles, a certain amount of photos, and then you'd queue them over the week or 2 weeks. We were releasing once every 2 weeks. So you queue them and then they would just come out. And then I think it's really important to be then, once they're coming out, engaging with what the feedback you're getting from the community. So not just sort of queuing and setting and forgetting, but having a discussion. And we were always open to feedback and having a conversation and starting a bigger conversation was what it was all about. So making sure you're on there and checking in. But yeah, to be honest, I think I'd learned a lot through that process. I wouldn't say I'm an expert at it. And even with my own social media sort of presence, I still haven't quite figured out how to do it, because I like to be as authentic as possible in my presence, and sometimes like planning things ahead feels really forced. So grappling with those two things personally for my personal Instagram is interesting, but for the podcast I think it's much more streamlined. Yeah, that's how I do it.
Because you've sort of got that central motivation, and that's what it's all about. But when it's got a structure, Instagram, it's exactly, it's anything. Don't be shy. What's your podcast about?
Well, it's called The Unlearning Project, and it's about unlearning harmful beliefs that we internalize about ourselves or other people, and questioning our conscious bias. And in it, I try to be quite vulnerable about my own biases, and that I'm not the first thoughts that come up. And I think often we are very politically correct online, or at least try to be, and then don't really admit that we might be having some of the thoughts that we deem very inappropriate. That the reality is they come up, and I feel like we're creating a false reality if we don't acknowledge them. So that's part of it. And then it's sort of being I'm not those initial thoughts, and then unlearning and unpicking, where did that thought come from? Who gave it to me? Because I wasn't born thinking that way. And it started with me and my body image and how I saw myself with my gender identity as well, being female and then being tall and broad-shouldered, and just how that didn't gel for people, and how it made me quite confused about who I was and felt like I was failing in my gender. So yeah, it's all about that. And so we have different guests on. I think we did 10 episodes in the first season to talk about different themes, very broad as well. So it's about things like gender, all boys schools, for example, and someone that went to an all boys school now, works in healthy masculinity space. Dr. Kyle Myers, who raised her child gender neutral until they chose their own pronouns, and what that process was like for her. So many. I'm trying to remember Soraya Chimale, who wrote Rage Becomes Her, which is an incredible book about how we respond differently to female anger, and how we just perceive it to be more aggressive, even though it's not. So the themes of gender and mental health definitely are woven throughout. But yeah, it was such a fun project, and I hope that I get to do it again at some point. But yeah, maybe not quite right now, because gosh, it is time consuming too.
As soon as we finish here, I know what I'm doing. But yeah, just going back to the scheduling and just things being time consuming, it's definitely the question that I get asked a lot, is how do you find the time and the motivation? And there's no one answer or easy answer. I'm sorry for bringing it up now. But you just have to find what works for you, really, don't you?
Yeah.
I think it's true of oh, sorry.
Oh, no, I was saying, what do you find that?
Yeah, I think people sometimes I talk to new authors, and they feel like there's an expectation of maintaining your social media presence, and you have to do things a certain way, and you have to post a certain amount, times of day. And it's just in the end, I just you just have to do what feels natural to you as well, because if you force it, I think people can tell, and then you're not having fun, and then you don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And then it's just a chore. I find this like deeply, deeply embarrassing. I don't know why, but I started making TikToks. And I think because it makes me feel really old. So I don't want to talk about it, but at the same time, and the algorithm there is so hectic, and it's like if you don't post like every day or like multiple times a day, like
Just
people don't
forgets
see.
you.
Yeah, and it's like, and I did feel that pressure to like, you know, like, oh, take it seriously and, you know, post these little things, and it's like I don't want to.
Exactly.
It's just like, yeah, and then I think when you focus on that, you sort of forget that it is a community building tool, and you can really isolate yourself by sort of trying to schedule things when you can't schedule things, you know, like I think having a weekly podcast is different to making, you know, TikToks and stuff and whatnot. But like, yeah, I don't know. It's all, I forgot what my point was, but that's my thought.
It's just hard. Yeah.
It's hard.
But definitely the authenticity is super important. And you do just have to, I've definitely just tried a few things, and it was even just like trying out props and editing tools and how I wanted to do photos, and they were just a pain in the bum, and I couldn't do any of them. And now I'll just hold a book up to my bookshelf or whatever, and that's fine. That'll do.
Yeah.
That's what works for me. But I just think it's what you're posting really matters more than the photo. Like those photos are beautiful, but you want to make those conversations and have those discussions. So
I like there's been a shift away from like the sort of overdone aesthetic of Instagram to like posts being engaged more that are like a little bit just like, I don't know, a screenshot of your notes where you've written an idea that just like compelled you and you wanted to share it right then and there. Like I feel like when I've done things that I've just seen something, I felt some kind of way, I was in the feeling, I've written a little paragraph about it, that's the one that gets the most engagement because it's, people can feel that genuineness, like you said, Alison. So yeah, I would really second that. I think just like not making it a chore, like you said, and sharing what you feel compelled to and being engaged, because otherwise I get quite cynical when I do the whole got to create things, got to share them, and then I just don't do it.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's definitely finding that balance. If anyone's sort of heard me talk about social media before, you've probably heard me say this, so I'm very sorry. But I just will always remember this one post, just scrolling through Instagram, there was this gorgeous post about a book series that I never saw anyone talk about. Like I hadn't read it, but I was so interested in it. And I was like, oh my God, my time has come. Like, tell me about this book series. I'm so interested. And the caption was just like, so I went to the gym this morning and then I had this smoothie, and like, I was so did nothing about the book. But like, that's fine. I don't want to, you know, if that's how people want to post, that's fine. But it just sort of felt kind of shallow because it drew me in. I wanted to make that connection with this book series, and it didn't happen. And I still know nothing about it. But I know what that person had for breakfast. So. But anyway, speaking of sort of making those connections and communities, Alison, you do the best work in creating really safe online communities for young writers. Like you have that regular writing meetup for trans writers. How do you go about creating these communities, and why is it important?
I think it's, so the writing group, for those who don't know, is for trans and queer and questioning young writers, so writers between the ages of 13 and 25, which is quite a large age range. So I think it's really interesting seeing the different kinds of people who show up. And I think the way to sort of, I think like more curate safe spaces rather than create them, because I think it's a team effort. And I think it's sort of acknowledging that like no space is ever 100% safe, because you never know, like someone might say something that they don't know is harmful, or like people have lots of triggers and you just do not know what they're going to be. And so just by keeping that sort of stuff in mind, I think lends itself to then the atmosphere of creating a nice space for people. And I think just being able to sort of just like let people come as they are, like anyone on their writing journey is allowed to come to the writing group. If you do want to come, if you just Google Alison Evans, Nyws is in writing group, it should pop up. It's on City of Melbourne's website. And it's just, I don't know, little things like someone asked us to turn on captions because we ran on Zoom. And just being able to let people know that they can ask for those kinds of things. I know one participant really struggled with, like, we do writing prompts and they really struggled with visual prompts. And so now whenever we do a visual prompt, we also have a paragraph of like, I guess like alt text, like just explaining what's in the image to get like the vibe across. Yeah, but speaking of that, there is also the trans showcase at NYWF, which is me and Nev's writing group. So you can see some of our members read some stories, which I think will be so cute. And that will be online, so you can just find it on the NYWF website. But yeah, I think it's just being open to learning, and knowing that you're not always right. And that like all of us do carry harmful beliefs and things we need to unlearn. And it's just a very long process of trying to be the best person that you can be. Yeah. So that's how I do it anyway. I think when I, right before my very first workshop, I was talking to my counselor, and they did a lot of teaching at the time, and they were just like, teaching is love. And I was like, yeah, okay. So it's not about like being, oh, I'm an expert at this and I'm going to bestow my knowledge upon you. It's building relationships, and I think you can't really build a good relationship without love and without respect. And so that's what I try to bring to my writing group.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. I think you and Nevo are just a dream team.
It's true. Yeah.
I think those young writers are very, very lucky to have you.
Yeah.
So I have to definitely check out that showcase. So excited. So we've been talking a lot about YA communities. Jess, you're not like specifically involved in the YA community, but can you tell us about any other online communities that you're part of, or any connections that you've formed on social media?
Yeah, I think that sort of, like I sort of touched on before, being a part of, I don't know that at the time I was even actively sharing, but I was very adamantly following, I guess, and engaging with the body positive community. And it was a really big part of my unlearning, was exposing myself to different bodies and just different ways of people showing up and being, and also showing parts of themselves that weren't normalized. And it really changed the way I was able to see other people and unlearn the unconscious bias, and just challenge myself on a whole bunch of levels. And I really learnt a lot in those spaces. And I was really inspired by them. I would never have written my first book, Love Your Body, or probably have been here if I hadn't learned from those body positive activists, and like been so passionate about what they shared, for free in these online spaces, about their own experiences and their own bodies. And it was really, really inspiring. And that kind of thing, like you said, Bianca, of like coming from one space and just not knowing these communities existed, and then what the internet allows you to be a part of and learn from. Like the course of my life would be completely different if I didn't learn just not only my relationship to my body, but then I was able to pass on that knowledge to other young people, which was really cool. So I was very much a part of that community. I wouldn't say that I'm as active in it anymore, because I guess you're driven by what you're like maybe working through at the time, or like what really we have points of passions, and I think they shift. So I still follow those people, but I don't engage so much anymore. But that community was particularly important to me. And I also, like you were saying, Alison, like I make lots of friends on there. Like, and it's so nice. I like say to someone, and I'm like, oh yeah, my friend. I was like, never met them in real life. Like with them. So that is just so lovely to meet people that like, resonate with what you're sharing and that you can connect with. Is really, really cool. And like, for example, I just moved to Nipaluna, Hobart, and was sharing pictures of the beautiful scenery here, and someone who knows of my book because of a past history of eating disorders and engaging with it, and her sister's a teacher, literally sort of reached out and was like, hey, welcome to the hood, like I've grown up here my whole life, do you want to have a coffee and hang out? And like had the best time. And now I have a friend who wrote. That's the nature of being, again, part of these communities. And yeah, I guess I am a part of it because I put that book out as well, and having that people be able to reach out because of that is like really special. So I think online communities are beautiful, and it's even more beautiful when you can like bring them into the real world, which
absolutely. Yeah, that's amazing.
Well, I think that like Bianca, I think a lot of people listening either are a part of the YA community already, but like for those who aren't, how can they be a part of this amazing community that I have also been learning about tonight? Now
Well, I feel like because it's literally in the title of this panel, I should say follow Love Oz YA. Not just sort of the organization's social media. That's a good way to keep up to date with everything that's happening. But honestly, just the hashtag, you can easily just click on it on Instagram or Twitter or TikTok. We're slowly building it up. We're going to make it happen.
We'll make it happen.
We're going to make it happen. But it's kind of like this is just this nice accumulation of everything that we've been talking about. Just reach out to people. If you just sort of go on that hashtag and a book interests you, you can comment on there and ask a bit more about it, or strike up discussions that way, or find your favorite books and people who are reading them, and honestly just drop a comment and say hi. Like, people love it. We are selfish creatures. We love when you engage with our content, and it's, people are posting those things on social media to form those connections. So if you're reaching out, finding those people, that's what they want. That's what it's there for. So super easy. And I promise everyone in not just the Love Oz YA community, but writing communities in general are super, super nice and super, super welcoming and really, really generous with their time. So don't be shy. Don't be afraid. Go say hi.
Yeah. I think that's true of like events as well. Like I was really scared to go to events like in real life. But that's how I found some of my friends, like Jess Layton, who is the digital manager for NYWF. Me and Jess are now like in a writing group, and so we see each other a lot. And it's just so nice to like, even if you don't know people really well, you sort of, as you go to all the launches and all the events, you see familiar faces, and it's just really nice. And then people come say hi, and then you're like, hi, and then I don't know. It's not as scared. I think everyone is as scared as you, so that's okay.
Exactly. We are all introverted bookworms. No, not all of us, I don't think, but I don't want to generalize. But yeah, honestly, you will find that the same people will go to those events because they want to and they're interested. And that's how I did it in Melbourne. I didn't know anyone when I went to a book club, the YA room, which obviously I became a part of, and it completely changed my life. That was my social media introduction. But yeah, the same people went to all the same events. And when I moved back to WA, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to start from the ground up. But like, no, it was the exact same. The same people go to these events, and they're all absolutely wonderful people. And it is terrifying, but I do think that it's always so worth it. And you do just have to go to these things, and you'll never regret it because you'll hear from amazing people. And they're usually in bookshops, so you can buy a book.
Yeah. This is dangerous times, but
leave the house.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. I super hope that you check out the rest of the National Young Writers Festival program.
Younger Young Writers program, which is, I think, mostly in real life and in Newcastle for the Hunter Valley teens. I'll be doing a zine workshop, which will be so fun. So bring your staplers. I'll bring my special staplers. Don't worry. But
yeah,
enjoy the festival.
Very exciting. And we are, in case you hadn't guessed, quite active on social media, all of us. So if you just want to reach out, say hi, we are friendly. You can do that. That is fine. If you need more recommendations or anything, we can all do that for you.
We can.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.